an irreversible choice. After death, not only the body remains, but something that continues to feel, perceive, and even suffer. Natalia Bekhtereva. When a person dies, their loved ones face a question that seems purely practical: to bury them or cremate them. But more and more spiritual scholars, consciousness researchers, and even neurophysiologists assert that this choice has consequences not only for the body but also for the soul. Today, we will tell you not just about a ritual, we will tell you how the way of parting with the body can influence a person's posthumous fate. And we will rely on the research, reflections, and observations of Natalia Petrovna Bekhtereva, a famous neurophysiologist who, in her later years, increasingly pondered questions about life after death. A memory that changed everything. Natalia Bekhtereva, a woman of science, long considered herself an agnostic, but one incident that happened to her in her mature years turned her understanding of the soul upside down. This happened after the death of her close friend. At the funeral, an ancient custom was violated. The body of the deceased was cremated almost immediately, on the second day. And for a week after that, Bekhtereva experienced inexplicable sensations. As if someone was trying to tell her something, as if there was a presence around that could not be described in words. She could not sleep. Her brain, even in sleep, continued to work at full capacity, as if processing a signal coming from somewhere not here. Later, when she began to read ancient sources, converse with lamas, Orthodox elders, and shamans, she realized that perhaps the quick cremation had interrupted the natural path of the soul's separation from the body. Why can cremation be dangerous for the soul? According to Bekhtereva's observations and confirmed by many esoteric sources, the soul does not leave the body immediately. The 1st, 3rd, 9th, and 40th days after death are not random numbers. These are temporal milestones when the soul gradually realizes its new nature, gets used to the loss of the physical shell, and looks around in the new space. But if the body is burned too quickly, for example, within the first 2 days, the soul may not have time to detach, and at the moment of cremation, experiencing sharp pain and panic, it can get stuck in the space between worlds. In the Tibetan and Vedic traditions, it is said that within the first 72 hours, the soul is still in the body. And if this body is subjected to fire, the soul may experience shock, suffering, and disorientation. Its further movement along the path of reincarnation or ascension may be disrupted. It may remain attached to the place of death or to people, not realizing that it has died. But isn't cremation an ancient practice? Yes, in Hinduism, Buddhism, and other cultures, cremation is common. But an important point is that in these traditions, there is a strict preparation ritual. The soul is guided and calmed. Its separation is accompanied by mantras, prayers, and spiritual guides. The modern cremation ritual, especially in city morgues, lacks sacrality. The body is sent to the furnace on the same day in a plastic bag without prayers or farewells. This is not a ritual, it is destruction. Natalia Bekhtereva spoke about this in a narrow circle. I see bodies turning into ashes, but I also feel that consciousness may still reside within them, albeit residual, but it is terrifying. What do the Orthodox say? The Orthodox Church traditionally prohibits cremation not because it fears fire, but because the human body is considered a temple. And the destruction of this temple before the soul's journey is completed can be perceived as an invasion. The Holy Fathers assert, the soul feels everything that happens to the body after death, and the body's pain can reflect on the soul's state. That is why prayers are held for the deceased in churches, memorial services are conducted on certain days, silence and light are maintained in the home. All this is done to help the soul on its journey. Modern morgues ignore the soul. Natalia Bekhtereva noted in her last lectures, "I fear that medicine has lost the ability to feel the sanctity of the moment of death. For doctors, death is the end, but for the soul, it is only the beginning." She proposed introducing ethical norms for handling the body after death, a minimum of 3 days without autopsy, without cooling the body to sub-zero temperatures, without violence against the remains. These days are needed not for the body, but for the soul. If you want to know what happens to the soul in the first 9 days after death and why certain practices can imprison it forever, then don't miss the next part. Subscribe to the channel now, like this video, and comment. Do you believe that the soul feels even after physical death? 9 days between worlds. Death, contrary to popular belief, is not an instantaneous event. It is a process in which the body, soul, and consciousness break their ancient bonds, reluctantly letting go of each other, slowly, sometimes painfully. In this transition, the first 9 days play a special role. Natalia Bekhtereva, a person who dedicated her life to studying the brain, was amazed at how much work continues after the heart stops beating. According to her, the human brain has an inertia of consciousness, the ability to retain remnants of personality and sensations even after clinical death. But it's not just about the brain. According to spiritual practitioners, the soul literally wanders between the earth and another world for 9 days, not knowing where to go. It returns to beloved places, hears voices, feels the pain of the living. It may even try to interfere in affairs it did not have time to complete during its lifetime. That is why it is so important how we behave during these days. Bekhtereva often emphasized that neuroscience cannot explain all the phenomena of consciousness and that at the moment of death, a person transitions into another state, not turning off like a computer, but as if exiting the system while maintaining integrity. In conversations with Tibetan lamas, she learned, during the first few days after death, the soul does not yet believe that it has left the body. It feels alive, may try to speak, move, even understand the speech of loved ones, but no one hears it anymore. This state is the first test, a kind of shock similar to waking up in complete darkness. And if during these hours the body is burned, cut open during an autopsy, or submerged in ice, the soul experiences horror, unbearable fear, and loneliness. From the 3rd to the 9th day, the soul begins to ascend the spiritual steps. So say the Orthodox elders. It visits places that were dear to it, watches over loved ones, sees how it is being seen off, whether they pray for it, whether they remember it. It is here that the main choice is made. The soul either continues on, accepting its new state, or stays, gets stuck. If it feels that no one is seeing it off, if it does not hear words of forgiveness, if it does not feel loved, such souls become those very ghosts, the deceased who cannot tear themselves away from the earth. Bekhtereva said, "I cannot prove this scientifically, but I feel that consciousness is not a product of the brain, it is something more. And it does not disappear after death, it waits." In different eras, the 9th day after death was marked by special rituals. People gathered in silence, lit candles, placed on the table what the deceased loved, read prayers, but most importantly, thought about them. The energy of memories, directed sincerely, without hysteria and fear, serves as a guide for the soul, a bridge between worlds. That is why Bekhtereva spoke out against the depersonalization of death in the modern world. Funerals have become a mechanical process. They call the funeral service, order wreaths, play music, and forget. But the soul does not forget. If it is not seen off, it may not leave. It can suffer for centuries, wandering in others' dreams, sitting in the corners of rooms that are no longer theirs. One of the strongest impressions on Natalia Petrovna was made by the story of a monk who lived in Tibet for 20 years, studying the practices of death. He told her that in their monastery, the deceased are not touched for 3 days. The body remains in the room, covered with a white cloth. No one wails or fuss. Everyone reads texts, sings mantras, talks to the soul, asks it to let go of fear and anger, to forgive everyone it loved or hated. Only on the 4th day can the body be buried or cremated, if that was the person's choice. But no lama will allow the body to be touched in the first 72 hours. It is a taboo because it is during this time that the soul learns to fly. Interestingly, even in the Russian tradition, deeply orthodox, similar elements have been preserved. People tried not to touch the deceased immediately. In the room with the body, candles burned, prayers were heard, they spoke in whispers, windows were left open so that the soul could leave. On the 3rd day, the first memorial feast was held, and the 9th day was considered a point of spiritual review. Loved ones gathered, remembered good deeds, read the Psalter. They seemed to give the soul a good send-off. Bekhtereva asserted, on this day, it is especially important not to hold on to the deceased, not to cry, not to ask them to return, but on the contrary, to thank. For gratitude is the last thread that connects the soul to the earth, not preventing it from leaving. In the modern world, this knowledge is almost lost. Morgues take bodies within hours. Autopsies are performed without the family's request. The deceased can be cremated the very next day. All this is done within the framework of the law and medical standards. But the main thing is forgotten: the body is a temple, and the soul is a guest who has not yet left. Do not miss the next part, where we will tell you what happens to the soul on the 40th day after death and why it is then that its final fate is decided. The 40th day. The final test. Among all the dates associated with death, the 40th day occupies a special, almost mystical place. It is like an invisible line, the last bridge beyond which the soul can no longer return. In the traditions of Orthodoxy, Buddhism, Islam, and even among the ancient Egyptians, it is precisely 40 days that are considered the time necessary for purification, forgiveness, repentance, and transition. And Natalia Bekhtereva, studying memory, thinking, and the structure of consciousness, increasingly asked the question, why did such different cultures intuitively come to the same number, 40? At the level of neuroscience, 40 days is the period in which a person can either get used to a new reality or finally lose touch with the previous one. The same, she said, may apply to the soul. During these days, the consciousness, freed from the body, seems to be searching for its new self. It observes, analyzes, lets go, and if it cannot let go, it suffers. Bekhtereva noted in an interview that people who have lost loved ones most often feel especially strong pain precisely by the 40th day. This is not accidental. The psyche of a living person intuitively reacts to the moment when the soul of a loved one leaves forever. We cannot explain this, but we feel it in dreams, in the body, in thoughts that come suddenly. In one of her notebooks, found after her death, Bekhtereva gave an example. In one case of observing a dying patient, 39 days after the death of his father, he told the doctor, "Now I feel that he is no longer nearby." As if before that he was waiting for something, and now there is silence. These words made a deep impression on the scientist. She pondered, and if the soul really needs these 40 days to decide, to forgive, to realize? After all, even a living person often does not have a whole lifetime to forgive themselves. About the soul, suddenly finding itself outside of time, outside of the body, outside of the familiar, all the more so. Many traditions assert that 40 days is not just a period, it is a test. During this time, the soul goes through a series of encounters with the images of its deeds, with those it has wronged, with those it did not have time to love. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it speaks of Bardo, the state between death and rebirth. It is in Bardo that the soul experiences fear, shame, joy, pain, and all this without a body. Bekhtereva said, "When I think about consciousness outside the body, it seems to me that it is like a dream from which one cannot wake up. Only in a dream do we have a chance to change everything, and in death, there is only a chance to understand." The 40th day is like a final exam, and not for the deceased, but for the living. Everything we do on this day, praying, remembering, speaking aloud to the soul, all this becomes part of its path. If a person was cremated before this day, it is important that the ashes are kept with respect, not thrown away, not forgotten. Bekhtereva warned, "You cannot turn ashes into an object. They still carry energy, and it is perceived by those who were close, and not only by them." She searched for a scientific explanation for this phenomenon for a long time. One of the hypotheses, field consciousness, a theory according to which a person's memory and feelings exist not only in the brain but also in the information field in which everyone participates. When the body dies, the field does not disappear. It continues to live as long as someone remembers, calls by name, speaks to it. 40 days is the period during which the field begins to weaken, moving away from earthly reality. If it is held by grief, anger, fear, then the soul may not leave. It remains at the crossroads without peace, without a body, without a voice. That is why the ritual of remembrance is so important. Not an official requiem, but a real meeting with the departed. People sit at the table, open photographs, recall kind words. Someone is silent, someone cries, someone whispers a prayer. This is what Bekhtereva called a spiritual connection through meaning. It does not matter what you believe in, what matters is how you remember. Meaning gives form. Memory gives the soul direction, and love gives it light. And if all this is given, the soul leaves peacefully. And then the living feel not pain, but quiet gratitude. As if something inside closes, not slamming, but gently lowering, like the lid of an old book. And at this moment, death ceases to be the end, it becomes a transition, and the one who has left no longer frightens. He leads the way. Do not miss the next part. We will tell you how the choice between cremation and burial can affect the fate of the soul. And what do ancient traditions and neuroscience say about this? Support the project, subscribe, like, and comment. Have you ever felt someone's presence many days after their death? Ashes or flesh? What does the soul choose? A question that is increasingly being raised: cremation or traditional burial? In the modern world, where cities grow upwards and cemeteries cannot expand, cremation is becoming a convenient, quick, and practical choice. But what if convenience hides something deeper? What if the choice of how to say goodbye to the body affects the path of the soul? Natalia Bekhtereva, who dedicated her life to studying the brain, could not help but notice this dilemma. And although she remained a scientist, her reflections often went beyond formulas and laboratories into the space where science meets intuition. She said, "The human body is not just a vessel, it is the last shell to which personality is attached. And how we say goodbye to it determines what remains in the field of memory." In her archives, there were notes about how some patients who had experienced clinical death remembered the moment when their bodies were touched by others' hands. These memories had no logical explanation, as the body was unconscious at that moment. However, the subjective experience of observation from the outside was too vivid to be ignored. Therefore, she asked, what if the soul really observes what happens to the body after death? If it sees how it is undressed, burned, poured into an urn, what does it feel at that moment, freedom or fear? And most importantly, does it have time to understand that it has died before its last shell disappears? In traditional religions, be it Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, cremation is viewed with caution. And not because fire is evil, but because it is an acceleration of the process that is supposed to go slowly. Death is not a switch. It is like a dying bonfire. It needs to be extinguished carefully, with respect, leaving room for the last light. In one interview, Bekhtereva confessed that personally, she preferred burial. She believed that the body should find peace by dissolving into the earth. She called the earth the organic memory of the planet. And if the body, which carried a unique structure of neurons, returns to the soil, it means it continues the dialogue with nature. And in the case of cremation, everything burns quickly, instantly, leaving no time, no trace. The soul, which has not had time to detach, can experience shock. However, she did not completely reject cremation. Her approach was deep. It is not about fire or earth. It is about how we do it. If cremation is done in haste, without farewell, without words, without meaning, then the soul remains in the void. But if the person was prepared, if they were spoken to, if the ashes were kept with respect, if the family remembered them every day, then even ashes can become light. For ashes, in her words, are not the end of the body but a concentrate of memory. And if the memory is alive, then the connection remains. This choice is especially acute for relatives. People do not know what is better. Some fear the earth, others fear fire. And everyone makes a choice based on pain. But Bekhtereva advised looking not at fear, but at meaning. Ask yourself, she said, in what form is it easier for you to speak with the departed? What helps you feel them nearby? If you can pray before an urn, then do so. If a grave is important to you, go there. The main thing is not to leave memory without a home. This is the key. Not where the body lies, but where the memory lives. If it is alive, the soul feels that it has not been forgotten, and if it is forgotten, it is lost. Religious texts say that the soul, which has not received a farewell, wanders between worlds. In scientific terms, this can be described as an unfinished process of mental integration. Consciousness, which has not received feedback, gets stuck in a cycle of repeating fragments, images, words, and pain. And then we begin to see the deceased in dreams, feel smells, and hear voices. Not because they haunt us, but because they have not left. That is why it is so important to make a conscious choice. Not just because everyone does it, not just because it is more convenient or cheaper, but because this is how I say goodbye. And this farewell should not be an act of parting, but a bridge of memory. Then the soul is not afraid to leave. Then it leaves in silence. And then we remain not with pain, but with a warm emptiness, one in which love lives. In the next part, we will reveal how to cope with loss and maintain a connection with the soul of the deceased without destroying oneself. What words are important, and which are dangerous? And why did Natalia Bekhtereva consider dreams after death to be the most important channel of communication? Support us, subscribe to the channel, like, and comment on how you would like to be bid farewell. How not to break the thread, the connection with the soul after death. Death is not the end, but a transition. So believed Natalia Bekhtereva. Her belief was not based on blind faith or religious dogmas. It was born from observations and hundreds of conversations with people who had crossed the boundary. She called death a transfusion of consciousness into another purity, comparing it to how a radio stops picking up a wave, although the station is still broadcasting. This means that the deceased do not disappear, they simply stop sounding in the range accessible to our ear. But sometimes in silence, especially in a state of sleep or deep sorrow, we catch these signals. We feel a touch, hear a voice, see an image. Bekhtereva attached special significance to dreams after the death of a loved one. She wrote that dreams in the first 40 days can be the last dialogue, an opportunity for the soul to say goodbye, convey feelings, or, on the contrary, show that it is still here. In one case described in her notes, a woman who had lost her son saw him every night for a week. He was silent but looked reproachfully. Only when the mother brought his photographs to the church and cried for the first time in a week did he disappear and never return. Psychologists explained this as liberation from guilt, but Bekhtereva added that perhaps he simply waited for her tears to leave peacefully. The connection with the deceased is a delicate thread. It cannot be pulled, otherwise, it will break. But to let it go without respect is to lose the chance for completion. That is why she said, talk to them, but do not ask them to stay. For a soul that is held back may suffer, especially if it is called from pain. A father who is constantly asked to return may not go where he should. He remains in the family's field, affecting dreams, health, and psyche. Bekhtereva believed that we can unconsciously hold on to souls, not allowing them to transition into another state. What to do? First of all, create a ritual of connection. It does not necessarily have to be religious. You can simply light a candle on a certain day, place a photograph, say aloud everything you did not have time to say, or write a letter. A letter to the deceased is a powerful tool, especially if it contains not accusations, but recognition of love, gratitude, and forgiveness. You left too soon. I miss you, but I let you go in peace. This phrase can free both them and us. Do not underestimate the power of words. There are words that bind and words that release. Bekhtereva warned against endless repetition. Why did you leave me? I cannot live without you. These phrases evoke a sense of guilt in the soul if it is still nearby. Instead, she advised, saying, I am grateful for the time we were together. I will carry this within me, and it is enough because the soul of the river is not a shadow, but a memory, realization, energy. It does not require pity, it thirsts for completion. Sometimes, in an attempt to preserve the connection, people turn to mediums, spiritual sessions, Ouija boards. Bekhtereva treated these practices with caution. She believed that they open channels we do not understand. And if we do not know how to close them, the consequences can be destructive. It is better to turn to the soul internally, quietly, without an external ritual. For the true connection is always silence. It is like the warmth of a fire that is not there. You just know that someone is nearby. And most importantly, do not try to bring the deceased back. They have gone where they should. But if you live with love, with faith, with respect for memory, they will be nearby. Not as a voice or a ghost, but as part of your intuition, as someone who helps you make the right decision, who supports you in difficult times, who walks beside you invisibly. This is not mysticism, it is the structure of human memory. And it is scientific. Natalia Bekhtereva once wrote, "The brain dies, but the neuronal connection, if it was strong, continues to live in another brain, in the one who remembers." This means that a part of the departed always lives within us. And this, perhaps, is the main answer. The soul does not leave completely. It changes form, and we can maintain contact with it if we are not afraid of silence. In the next part, we will reveal how to handle ashes or the body so as not to disrupt the energetic path of the soul. What happens if the ashes are thrown away, lost, or disrespectfully scattered? And why, even after 10 years, can the soul call if the memory has been forgotten? Support our work. Subscribe to the channel, like, and comment. Have you ever felt that the deceased is speaking to you in a dream? What happens to the ashes? The connection between the body and the soul after death. When a person dies, the body is the last thing that remains of their earthly presence. But for many cultures, as well as for the research of Natalia Bekhtereva, the body is not just an empty shell, it is a vessel in which the energetic imprint of the soul is preserved for some time. And how this body is treated can either complete the process of departure or, conversely, hinder it. Cremation is an ancient practice widespread in Hinduism, Buddhism, and even pre-Christian Europe. However, in the Orthodox tradition, it is perceived ambiguously, not because of the procedure itself, but because of the fear that the destruction of the body may hinder the resurrection or the transition of the soul. Bekhtereva, however, argued that it is not physical destruction that affects the soul, but the attitude towards the body. Burning the body in fire, but with love and respect, is safer than burying it in anger, quarrel, or without forgiveness. She spoke of cases where ashes were thrown away by relatives as unnecessary garbage. And months later, inexplicable malfunctions began in the family, illnesses, insomnia, fears in children, and sharp conflicts. One man whose mother had died kept her urn on the balcony, forgetting about it. Only when he, on the advice of a psychologist, scattered the ashes at her favorite lake and uttered words of gratitude aloud did he stop seeing her in his dreams, where she cried and called him home. This may seem like mysticism, but from Bekhtereva's point of view, it is psychophysics. Ashes are a symbol. And as long as they exist, they demand respect. Therefore, the choice between cremation and burial is not only a practical question but also a question of inner ethics. If a person is afraid that fire will destroy something important, it is better to bury. If they feel that burning liberates, then this is the path. The main thing is not the method, but the state of farewell. There is an important point. You cannot keep an urn with ashes at home if you are not ready for it to be a reminder, an energetic anchor. Home is a place of life, not a museum of memory. Bekhtereva believed that prolonged storage of ashes in a living space could hinder the processes of adaptation, both for the living and for the soul. It is as if you are keeping the door ajar, not allowing either yourself or the departed to truly leave. It is better to find a place where memory lives but does not interfere. Another important aspect is the place of repose. It should be symbolically connected to the person. Not just the nearest cemetery or columbarium, but something that has emotional significance. There is a story described in Bekhtereva's archive. A woman scattered her brother's ashes in the mountains where they played as children. She cried, read his favorite poems, and left a stone with his initials. And then, every time she returned there, she felt peace, as if he had become part of that landscape. This is completion, this is a ritual that works. And conversely, when ashes are thrown into a river without words or respect, when they are simply handed over to strangers as an unnecessary thing, it can cause an internal conflict. And even if a person does not realize this, on a deep level, a sense of guilt arises. And guilt is what holds the soul. For, as Bekhtereva said, the soul does not leave those who have not let it go. Therefore, the choice to cremate or bury should come not from fear, but from awareness. It is important to ask yourself, what do I want to express with this act? If it is respect, love, and farewell, it does not matter whether the body is under the ground or in ashes. The main thing is that it is not forgotten, that there is a thought, a word, a bright memory. And then the soul can go where it is called not by pain, but by light. In the next part, we will talk about what can happen to the soul if it is forgotten. Why is memory not just a part of our psyche, but a bridge between worlds? And how can gratitude and prayer change the fate of the departed even decades later? If this topic resonates with you, like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments about what farewell ritual you consider correct. What happens to the soul if it is forgotten? Among the many questions that Natalia Bekhtereva raised in her research, one held a special place. What happens to the soul when it is forgotten? This is not an abstract question, but a deeply practical one. For in our culture, there is an everyday nature to loss. People die, and after some time, even the closest begin to live on. Some with pain, some with relief, and some with indifference. And then the soul, once connected to this world, finds itself in a vacuum. Bekhtereva spoke of dreams and visions that came to people years after the death of their loved ones. One man saw his mother standing in an empty white hall, without words or gestures, as if she could not approach him. He thought it was just a play of the subconscious, but after a visit to a spiritual father and a long conversation, he realized that he had never thanked her, never forgiven or let her go. Psyche, memory, energy, all this is connected. A forgotten soul can remain in waiting. From Bekhtereva's scientific point of view, memory is not just a function of the brain, it is a channel of connection between worlds. As long as we remember, we hold the thread. If this memory is warm, with gratitude and respect, it nourishes both us and what remains beyond. But if we forget, not just fail to remember, but erase, as if the person never lived, then their path becomes heavy. Not because they are punished, but because their part is still among us. In different cultures, this understanding is expressed in rituals. Commemorations, candles, prayers, stories about ancestors. These are not just traditions, they are techniques of departure. The soul cannot complete its journey if its name has disappeared from human memory. And conversely, when we remember, tell stories, share photographs, and give thanks, we give the soul the opportunity to complete its earthly echo. One of the most touching cases Bekhtereva described in her notes. A woman came to her after a series of nightmares in which an unknown girl appealed to her. After long questioning, it turned out that her grandmother had lost a child in her youth and never spoke of him. No grave, no photo. The child was as if erased. And after generations, this forgotten name began to knock in dreams, demanding recognition. Only when the family held a symbolic commemoration and gave a name did the dreams stop, and the house became quieter. A forgotten soul is like an unhealed wound of the family. It is not evil, it does not avenge, it simply wants to be seen. And that is why in the traditions of many peoples, there are days of remembrance, common prayers, and photographs on the walls. This is not about mourning, it is about connection, about the fact that death is not the end, but a transition that requires accompaniment. And if forgotten, the transition may remain incomplete. In this context, it becomes clear why Bekhtereva insisted, do not be afraid to speak about death, be afraid to forget, do not be afraid to cry, be afraid of indifference, because it is from these simple gestures, from words, from memories that a bridge is born. And along this bridge, the soul can leave peacefully, and then it becomes easier for us as well. In the next part, we will turn to how prayer and gratitude can change even the fates of the departed. What happens when we begin to forgive, give thanks, and remember after many years? And how can this affect our own path here and now? Write in the comments about whom you remember most often, whose name is an anchor in the past for you. Gratitude and prayer. The power of words that change everything. Can we change what has already happened? Can we influence the fate of the departed if years, or even decades, have passed since their death? From the position of the material world, no. We cannot go back. We cannot resurrect, we cannot fix. But from the point of view of Natalia Bekhtereva and spiritual science, there are words that penetrate through time. These words are gratitude and prayer. Bekhtereva asserted that the energy of words is not just vibrations of air, it is a code. Especially when the word is born in a sincere heart. The word grow can free both the living and the dead. The word thank you can pull the soul out of the shadow of oblivion. And the word love, even if spoken silently, gives the departed warmth that they will no longer receive anywhere else but from us. She described cases of a woman who, 20 years after her father's death, suddenly began to cry for no reason. Her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. And only after she thanked her father aloud for all the good, despite the grievances and childhood wounds, did she feel as if a heavy stone in her chest had disappeared, as if someone who had been standing behind her back had finally moved on. Prayer does not necessarily have to be church-related. It can be simple: you were, I remember, and I forgive. There are special days, days of commemoration, when the thin line between worlds becomes especially permeable. But it is not just about the dates. Every time you light a candle and say a name, you reach out. Every time you speak of a person who is no longer with us with respect, without anger, you build a bridge. And it does not matter how many years have passed, the soul does not need a calendar. It needs a connection. In her practice, Bekhtereva emphasized that prayer is not mysticism, it is a psychophysiological realization of love. It changes not only the state of the soul of the deceased but also the fate of the living. People who began to regularly pray for their ancestors reported a decrease in anxiety, the disappearance of insomnia, and an improvement in family relationships. It was as if a tangled ball of yarn gradually unraveled. Because when the pain of the ancestors leaves, it becomes easier for the descendants to breathe. There is a story that particularly touched Bekhtereva. A young man who grew up without parents felt for many years that his life was going downhill. He considered himself abandoned and unnecessary. But when he learned the story of his mother, that she had died giving birth to him and had not had a chance to hug him even once, he lit a candle in her honor for the first time. He spoke her name, which he had never heard before. And from that moment, the energy in his life began to change. He stopped drinking, returned to his studies, and even started a family. Not because of magic, but because the connection was restored. We think that words are air, but for the soul, words are food. Gratitude is not just an act of upbringing, it is an act of liberation. And when you thank those who have passed, you give them the opportunity to let go of their fears, their pain, and move on. And along with this, you let go of something within yourself. In the next part, we will talk about the most important thing: how to choose between cremation or burial so that the soul leaves in peace. And why is the moment of farewell decisive for everyone, for the dead and for the living? If you have ever felt that someone who has passed is near, but you do not know what to do, try writing a letter of gratitude. This can change everything. Farewell. The moment that determines everything. Farewell to the body. This is not just a ritual, it is the act of the last touch between two worlds. How this farewell takes place can determine not only the inner state of loved ones but also the very feeling of the soul leaving the earthly plane. Natalia Bekhtereva, studying both the neurophysiology of grief and the testimonies of those who have experienced clinical death, emphasized, the moment of farewell is a key stage for the soul and its path. Many think that the main thing is what comes after: where to bury, how to pray, what to remember. But everything begins precisely at the moment when the body leaves the home or the morgue and is sent to the place of final rest. And here, in Bekhtereva's opinion, it is especially important not so much where this happens, but how, with pain or with love, with the coldness of formality or with the warmth of recognition, with protest or with acceptance. She told of a case where a man refused to go to his mother's funeral. He said, "It's just a body. I don't like ceremonies." But after that, for months he was haunted by insomnia, anxiety, and a strange feeling that he had not said goodbye. Ultimately, after 6 months, he went to the grave, knelt down, and for the first time said, "Forgive me." And only then, as he later admitted, silence came. Farewell is not for the deceased, it is for the living. But it is in this farewell, according to Bekhtereva, that the soul receives the signal: you were important, you left a mark, and you can go further. It is especially important that someone close recognizes this person's life not just as a set of facts, but as a path full of pain, love, mistakes, and victories. Words spoken at this moment sound louder than any prayers if they come from the depths of the heart. Here also arises one of the most difficult questions: what to choose, cremation or burial? From a scientific point of view, the body is a biological shell. After death, only organic material remains. But from an energetic point of view, according to Bekhtereva and those who dealt with borderline states, the body remains a carrier of information for several days after death. That is why it is so important that the farewell process is not hasty, but conscious. Cremation, strangely enough, can even be gentler for the soul if it is carried out with love and respect. Everything depends not on the fire, but on what surrounds this moment. If loved ones stand silently, without uttering a word, the soul may feel that its path has been broken. But if words of gratitude, prayers, and memories are heard, the fire becomes purifying. Burial, especially in traditional forms, allows the family to return to the place of memory. It creates an anchor to which one can return. But here, too, everything depends not on the coffin, not on the stone, but on the heart of those who say goodbye. One can bury with a lavish ceremony and forget the next day. Or one can cremate and carry it in the heart for a lifetime with gratitude and love. Bekhtereva emphasized, the soul goes where it is remembered. And if the choice of the form of farewell is associated with respect, warmth, and light, then this will be the right one. There is no universal answer. But there is a universal rule: do not be afraid to speak with the deceased. Say everything you did not have time to say. Forgiveness and gratitude work beyond time. In the next part, we will touch on the energy of objects left by the deceased. Is it worth keeping the things of the departed, or, on the contrary, letting them go? How do they affect the field of the family and the soul? And have you ever felt that you did not say goodbye properly? Write about it. This could be the beginning of an important inner dialogue. Things of the deceased, a bridge or an anchor. When a person leaves, their things remain. Clothes, books, glasses, notes in the margins, a favorite mug. Each item is like an imprint. Some hurry to get rid of them, as if afraid that the pain will remain with these things. Others, on the contrary, keep them for years, not daring to throw away a single piece of paper. Where is the line between memory and attachment? And how do the things of the deceased affect the living and the soul of the departed? Natalia Bekhtereva, observing families after a loss, made amazing conclusions. Objects can carry an emotional charge, sometimes supportive, sometimes destructive. It all depends on the feeling with which we touch them. If we take our father's jacket and smile, remembering his scent, this warmth is an anchor of light. But if every time the heart clenches with pain and guilt, it becomes an anchor of suffering. And then the object does not help the soul to leave, but on the contrary, ties it to the earthly. Bekhtereva emphasized that the soul, especially in the first weeks after death, hears the field of its objects. It feels how they are treated. If things are thrown away in anger, if the memory is destroyed, the soul can experience anxiety, a feeling of abandonment, as if it has been erased. If things are passed on with respect, for example, a beloved book is donated to a library, clothes to those in need, then the soul feels that its contribution continues. One case particularly struck Bekhtereva. A woman who had lost her mother left her room untouched for 10 years. Every day she went in there, sat on the edge of the bed, and cried. She did not allow anyone to touch anything, neither the comb nor the glass on the nightstand. From a psychological point of view, this looked like being stuck in the stage of denial. But at some point, she decided to write a letter to her mother, thank her for everything, and free the room. She arranged a modest farewell ritual with the things. And after that, for the first time in 10 years, she felt that she could laugh without feeling guilty, as if her mother had let her go, or vice versa, she had let her mother go. Bekhtereva did not call for throwing everything away or turning things into relics. She said, everything that holds love remains. Everything that holds pain goes away. Sometimes leaving one thing, one photograph, one note is enough. The main thing is that when looking at it, warmth arises in the chest, not an icy lump. There are also family relics, rings, crosses, watches that are passed down from generation to generation. Their energy is strong, but it is multi-layered. If the object carries stories of love, courage, and faith, it becomes a talisman. But if it is filled with pain, violence, and curses, it can transmit this energy further. That is why Bekhtereva recommended cleansing such objects not only physically but also with words. Thank, forgive, say. You were a witness to pain, now you are a witness to love. Sometimes, to free up space in the house, you first need to free up space in the heart. Then the decision of what to leave and what to let go comes by itself. Things are not just matter, they are bridges between worlds. But it is important to remember that the bridge should not become a cell. It should lead to where there is light. Dreams and farewell, bridges between worlds. After the death of a loved one, many begin to see them in their dreams. These dreams can be so vivid that it is hard to believe that this is just the work of imagination or a real meeting of the soul with the soul. Natalia Bekhtereva, studying the subtle states of consciousness, came to the conclusion, dreams are not just memories, they are bridges between worlds through which souls try to convey a message to us, give a sign, help to let go, or find peace. The human brain is a remarkable organ, but it is not able to explain everything that happens in a half-dream and dream state. Especially when it comes to deep feelings that break through all the boundaries of reality. At those moments when we sleep, our consciousness lets go of earthly limitations. And perhaps it is then that the soul of the deceased gets the opportunity for contact. In these dreams, not so much speech is heard as feelings, love, forgiveness, gratitude. Sometimes the soul comes to help us cope with grief, sometimes to say, everything is fine, I am here, or to ask for forgiveness. Bekhtereva noted that such dreams often coincide with energetic shifts in the family, with inner experiences. When we see the deceased in our dreams and feel their warmth, it helps us rewrite the pain of loss, give it a new light meaning. Dreams become a tool of healing, as if a bridge along which not only memories but also love, support, and spiritual acceptance move. It is important to remember that these dreams are not a reason to be afraid or to cling to the past. On the contrary, they teach us to forgive and let go, to see departure as the beginning of a new stage, not the end. The soul that comes in a dream wants to help us understand that death is not a boundary, but a transition. And we, the living, learn to see this truth through the heart, not the mind. Farewell is not just a ritual over the body, it is the path of the soul, the path of all who remain. Every step, from choosing cremation or burial to how we keep the things of the departed and how we accept dreams, shapes our attitude towards life and death. Natalia Bekhtereva called for perceiving these moments with respect and attention. For it is in them that the depth of our human experience is revealed, the connection with the eternal. In conclusion, I want to say, do not be afraid to speak with the deceased. Do not be afraid to remember and ask for forgiveness. And most importantly, do not forget that love is the force that does not die, but continues to live, support, and connect us through all times and spaces. May this path of farewell and understanding help you find peace and light in your soul and find answers to the most difficult questions of life and death.